Hello and welcome back to the course on art programming. I hope you had a chance to play around with qplot and maybe even you attempted the challenge for this section. And what we're going to do today is we're going to build that visualization that we're after. And now we know so much about qplot already, and it's such a simple tool, it won't take long at all. So let's dive straight into it. We're going to copy this comment here to create a new section in our code, visualizing what we need. Very elaborate name for a section. All right, let's try. Let's start doing it. qplot data equals stats, right? We're going to pass the data to qplot. Now we can freely operate with the columns in our data, and we'll say, what do we want to visualize? We want to visualize internet users, so we'll put them on the x-axis, and we want the birth rate. We'll put it on the y-axis. So we'll go internet users, comma, y equals birth dot rate. Run that. Voila. Simple as that. One line, 3 components, and we've got our visualization ready. Let's go take that to our manager. Well, of course, we're data scientists. We can't just take it like that. It's gotta tell a story. It's gotta look good, right? So let's work on that. What are we going to do? We're going to copy this, and we're going to add the size. Right, we're going to make them a bit bigger. Now the size, we're not mapping the size. Mapping is when we're assigning, as we discussed in the previous tutorial, mapping is when we're assigning a parameter. So in this case, size, we would assign it to a variable. In this case, we just want to increase the size for all of these points. So we're going to say size equals I and 4. And that's why the I is there, because we're assigning the size increase to every point. So let's run that. There we go, the size has increased. Good. Now what are we going to do next? We're going to, let's add a color. Let's color all of these points to start off with. Let's see how we can do that. Let's add the color here. Color equals, we already know that we need the eye again because we want the same color for all of them. And what are we going to say? Let's say red. Make some space here and run that, run that. There we go, so all of the points are red. Okay, that's great. Now what we want is, remember that the challenge actually asked us to categorize the scatter plot by the income groups of the countries. So how about we do that now? So we'll take this, and instead of I red, we're going to use income group. Now we won't need the I anymore because we are mapping this variable to the visualization. We want the different income groups to have different colors, and maybe we'll increase the size here a bit because these are still a bit small. So if I run this and I run this now, much better, right? Isn't that much better? We can see that we've got income groups, we've got red, green, blue, and purple, and we can see how they are located here. So that is already a great start, and we can now even analyze this chart. We can even derive some insights. We can see that so let's recall, on the horizontal axis we've got internet users, right? So what percentage of the population has access to the internet from 0 to 100? And on the vertical axis we have the birth rate. So how many children are born per year per 1,000 people of this population? So if you take 1,000 people, how many children per that 1,000 will be born in every year? And this is the data for 2012. So what you can see here is that the high income group are all kind of located here, meaning that a lot of the population, a huge percentage, over 50%, and in many cases over 75%, have access to the internet, but the birth rate is quite low. It's somewhere between 5 and 20 or 25. Then you've got the upper middle income, the purple ones. They're a bit back, so they don't have these countries. Not that much of the population has access to the internet. A percentage somewhere between, for most cases, between 25 and 75. For some cases, it's under 25, and then the birth rate is a bit higher. Then the lower middle income, the birth rate is even higher, and the access to internet is even lower. So it's in most cases, under 50% of the population have access to the internet. And finally, the low income, so very high birth rate, at times 4 times as high or even 5 times as high as in the high income category, but at the same time the internet access is very low, so less than 25%. How interesting is that, right? So as you transition from low income countries to high income countries, your internet usage increases, the percentage of people using internet, and your birth rate falls. It almost seems like there's a correlation between the two, right? So when people don't have internet, this is correct, of course not. A correlation doesn't imply causation, right? So it's of course not. We're not proving here that there's a correlation, but it almost seems that when people have like a lot of internet, they don't have time for children. When people have no internet, all they're doing is making more children. So it's just a funny observation like that. But otherwise, this chart is telling a beautiful story. And this is exactly what we were after. So congratulations, we have solved the challenge. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope that you're truly proud of what you were able to achieve using data frames and learning about them in such a short period of time. And I look forward to seeing you on the next tutorial, where we will continue our journey into the world of data frames. And until then, happy coding! Hello and welcome back to the R programming course. And in the previous tutorial, we created this beautiful visualization, and in fact, we actually completed the challenge. So we have done what was expected of us, and we created this scatter plot, and now we can present it. So what's next? So what are we going to learn in this tutorial? Well, we've so far learned how to import data frames and how to work with them and even how to visualize them. However, we haven't yet learned how to create them. It'd be great if we had an opportunity to practice that. Well, luckily, our manager has just run into the office with an urgent request for us. Let's have a look at it. You have received an urgent update from your manager. You are required to produce a second scatter plot also illustrating birth rate and internet usage statistics by country. However, this time, the scatter plot needs to be categorized by country's regions. Additional data has been supplied in the form of our vectors. So pretty much the same thing as we did, but instead of categorizing by income group, like we did last time, this time we need to categorize by region. So whether it's Africa, Asia, Europe, and so on. And this time, the additional data, so we can continue working with our existing data, but also we're going to add more data to our analysis, and it's going to be supplied in our vectors. So let's go ahead and find that data. That data is of course located at www.superdataScience.com/rcourse, one word. And if you scroll down here to section 5 data frames, then you'll find this third data set over here, country region vectors, third link over here. So if you go ahead and download that, then what it'll be a zip file that, like you can see over here. And then once you unzip it and open it in R, it will look like this. So here we've got 3 vectors. So this is like the actual file that you will see, and it's creating 3 vectors and putting them into these 3 objects. All you have to do is select all the code and run it. So let's go ahead and do that. And what that will do is it will create these 3 vectors for you here. So codes, countries, and regions. So we can get rid of this filter actually, but we'll do that later. So here we've got these 3 vectors that we've created, A, B, W, A, F, G. So what does this look like? This looks like the codes of the countries, then the countries themselves, and the regions. Okay, so that's a good start, right? So now we have this information. Each vector has 195 elements to it, which is the same as our data frame, which is a good thing, good sign. But now the question is, why is this information in vectors? How do we put it into a data frame? And that's exactly what we're going to learn today. So let's dive straight into the tutorial. All right, so section 5, and here we're going to create a new section in our code, and we'll call it creating data frames. Exciting tutorial ahead. Okay, how do we create a data frame? Well, we've already got the vectors. Now all we have to do is put the vectors into a data frame. And this is going to be very similar to something we already know. And that something is the cbind function. So this time we're going to use a function called data frame. And don't forget the dot in between. That's how the function is called. And now here you need to pass the vectors that you want to bind into a data frame. So let's pass the vectors that we have. So this one's going to be codes 2000. No, let's start with countries. So countries 2012 dataset. That's the first vector. Then we're going to pass the codes 2012 dataset, and then we're going to pass the regions. There you go. So you can see I'm even starting to type with a small letter here, not a capital, and it's prompting me for a capital. So that's a good thing. Speeds up your coding as well. All right, so there's our three vectors. I'm actually going to put this on a new line so we can see all of that. So just like the cbind function does, the data frame function will put all of these into a data frame. Well, not a matrix, a data frame this time. And if we run that, you will see that now we have a mydf. So now let's go and check out mydf. We're just going to use the head function to see the top rows. So let's make some space over here, and let's make some space over here. So there you can see now we've got this new data frame. Now we have two data frames. We've got the stats data frame and the mydf data frame. In the mydf data frame, you've got the countries, the data set, the codes for the data set, and the regions. All right, so what are we doing now? Well, now we want to change these names of these columns. They're like too long, right? How do we change the names? Well, it's exactly the same as with matrices. We already know this, and it's a good opportunity to practice this again. So call names mydf, and into here, what do you want to put? So by the way, if you feel confident at any stage throughout these tutorials, just pause the video and try to complete the code we're typing in yourself. In this case, we want to put in C, so we want to add a vector, and here we're going to say country, and then what's the second column? Code, and the third column region. So if I just run call names of mydf, you'll see that these are the current call names. Now if I run this whole line, the call names have been changed, and if I look at call names now, it's just country, code, region. And we can confirm that by using the head function again. You can see that now it's much neater. Like compare this with where it's so spaced out just because of the names of the columns to this, where it's nice and neat and you don't have anything extra. All right, so that's a good start. But I actually wanted to show you another great feature of R, which we are finally ready to understand and ready to learn. So I'm going to comment these out as if they never existed, and I'm actually going to remove the mydf data frame. You'll see why in a second. So I'm going to remove it completely. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate it. So I'm just going to copy this line again. And here, instead of just saying the names of the vectors that I want to put in my data frame, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them names right away. So I'm going to say country, and without the quotation marks, I'm just going to say country equals. Then I'm going to say code, and without quotation marks, I'm going to say code equals to that vector. So let's make some room here. And then instead of region, regions vector, I'm going to say region without quotation marks equals regions, right? So what we're doing here is, it might seem a bit odd, first of all, because these, you would think that something that you want as a name would always have quotation marks like we have in this case. But what we're doing is we're calling the data frame function, and we're virtually creating our own parameters that we're passing to the data frame function, and then it will treat this as the data and this as the name. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. So right now we don't have a mydf data frame right now in our data, but if I run these two lines, I've just created mydf, and if I look at it, you will see that that's the whole of mydf. Of course, we just need the top part. So let's do that again. So here we can see that right away these columns have the names that we wanted, right? And we can just like play around with it. Let's say ABC, right? Let's see what that does. If we do that and we run that, you'll see that now this column is called ABC. And that is a very powerful tool in R because it allows you to save time. Instead of creating a data frame and then renaming the columns, you can right away create the data frame with the renamed columns. And the most of the code that you will see in R, if you're looking at other people's code, it will be created like this. So they'll know I want a column called country, and the data set I want to put in there is this one, or the vector. And then I want a column called code, and this is the data, and so on. So be prepared for that, and also use that to your advantage. And moreover, I'll tell you this, that this same approach works in the cbind function and the rbind function. You can use exactly the same approach. And I really wanted to tell you about it back in that section, but it was a bit too early for us. It would have been a bit of overwhelming to try to grasp this at that time, but now you're ready for it, and you can totally practice this same approach with the cbind and rbind functions. So I'm just going to rerun this so I have the correct data frame. Okay, and all we wanted to check here is just check the head, and let's practice the tail function just to see that it makes sense, right? So that maybe check some codes that Zimbabwe is in Africa, Samoa, Oceania, South Africa, the codes. Yeah, looks like it makes sense. That's always a good thing to check that everything makes sense. And finally, let's just check our data set using the summary function mydf. And here you can see that we've got countries, codes, and regions, right? So everything looks okay. It looks like every country, is only present once, and every code. So if you add this up, it should add up to 195. That's 195. And here you've got many countries in per region. All right, so that's how you, first of all, create data frames using the data frame function and vectors. And second, we learned today is how to specify the names for your columns in a data frame right away. And also this approach works for the cbind and rbind functions. That's great. We learned quite a lot today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Until then, happy coding. Hello and welcome back to the course on R programming. In the previous tutorial, we created our own data frame based on the vectors that we were supplied. So now we have two data frames. We've got the original one, the stats data frame, and we've got the mydf data frame. And our goal today is to transfer some of the information from the mydf data frame, and specifically we want after the regions, into the stats data frame, right? So let me create a new section, and I will explain exactly what we're after. So there's the new section, and this one we're going to call merging data frames, because that's exactly what we're going to be doing. All right, so let's have a look at the top bits of each one of these data frames. So how do we look at the top bits? We look at them using the head function, and we say stats. That's the first one. And the second one is the top bits of mydf, right? So let's make some space here, and then we can discuss what the plan is for today, what the plan of attack is. All right, so this is the original data frame that we loaded from a file, as you remember. And here we've got country name, country code, birth rate, internet users, income group, and we've already visualized that, so we've got this beautiful visualization on the right. Now, according to our additional challenge, we need to create the same visualization, but instead of coloring the dots by income group, we need to color them by region. And country code and region, we were supplied this information in additional vectors, and in the previous tutorial we put them all into a data frame over here, which is called mydf. Now the challenge for today that we have is how do we combine all of this, because we can't really visualize this data if the internet users and birth rate, so this numeric data is in this data frame, but the categorical variable region is in this data frame. How do we combine all of that into one data frame? And what you will see here is that we have countries, right? So we're looking at each row is a separate country, and same thing here, each row is a separate country. So that is our key to success in this case. That is the way we're going to combine these two data frames, or in fact how we're going to merge them. We're going to say just take the rows and match them by country. So look for instance, Aruba in this data frame, and then take these columns or take this whole row and add it to the row, so right over here on the right, which also has Aruba. And then Afghanistan, add it to Afghanistan. Angola, add it to Angola. Now that's the concept behind it. However, personally I find it's always safer to go with codes, because in country name, and this is kind of like more of a data analytical tip or data science tip for you, that sometimes in country name, especially when the data is coming from different places, it's very likely, not very likely, it's very simple that there could have been a mistake. Somebody might have typed in a country with the wrong letter somewhere, or put an extra space, or forgotten a space, like might have typed in United Arab Emirates as one word or something like that, and that way your match will not go through. Whereas country codes are more reliable, they're universal, right? It's always 3 letters, they have a format, it's very unique, it's very hard to make a mistake. I mean, like, you could have made a mistake, but probably these weren't typed up manually. Probably these codes came from somewhere. So it's always better to match on codes. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to see where the codes match, and that way we're going to add those rows in. All right, so that's the plan of attack. How do we get that to work in R? Okay, so the function that we're going to use is called merge. So that's what the function is. And we're going to put the merged value into a data frame which we will call merged, just for fun. And now, what are we going to pass to this function merge? We need to give it some value so it knows what we want to merge. Well, first we want to pass it the name of the data frame that we want on the left, which will be stats, and then the name of the data frame which we want on the right, which will be mydf. Now it needs to know how exactly do we want to match those two data frames. Well, then to explain that, you say by.x equals, and then you explain which column you want to use from the first data frame. The first data frame has a column called country code, and we want to use that column. We have to pass it in quotation marks. Then we put a comma and we say by.y. And why you have by y by x? Because x is the data frame on the left, and then by.y, y is the one on the right. So just that this function knows exactly which data frame you're talking about. Then here we want to use the column code in quotation marks. Beautiful. So that's all we have to do. And if I run that, you will see that now we have a new data frame over here, which has 7 variables. Okay, let's find out why it has 7 variables, because this one had 5, this one had 3. It should have 8, right? So let's have a look what happened over here. If we look at merged, and let's look at just the head, the top part of it, and maybe let's make some room first so that it fits on one screen. So what we have here is we've got country code, country name, birth rate, internet users, income group, country, and region. What column is missing? Well, the column that's missing is just the code, this column from the second dataset. Why is it missing? Well, the reason is because we're matching on this column, right? So we've got country code equals to code, right? So R already knows that it will not make much sense for you to have a duplicate of this column, because that's what it did. It matched on that column, so obviously they're going to be the same. So that's why R just doesn't include that column for you and saves you some space. At the same time, we can also see that we already have a duplicate column as well. We see country here and we see country name, and they're going to be the same, right? So how do we fix that up? Well, we're going to remove the column. We're going to remove this duplicate column country. And how do we remove columns? Well, just as we learned before, we say merged, then country. Another good opportunity to practice something we've learned already. So if we run that, and now we look at, let's say, instead of head, let's look at str for structure, merged. You will see that we have country code, country name, birth rate, internet users, income group, and region. And we don't have any duplicate columns. So what we have just done is we've transferred this region column into the merged data frame. So we have a data frame that has all the columns from the first data frame and just that one column that we are after from the second data frame. And if we want, we can look at, let's say, last 5, last 6 variables, rows here. As you can see, it all makes sense. Everything is working fine, and you can just confirm South Africa is actually in Africa, and Yemen is in the Middle East. All right, so everything's working fine. That's great, and we're ready to proceed with the next step, which would be visualizing this new data frame. And I look forward to seeing you on the next tutorial. Until then, happy coding.